Everybody, I am Lauren Simonetti in for Maria Bartiromo. It is Thursday, December 27th. Here are your top stories at 6 a.m. Eastern Time. The monster rally at risk. Futures pointing to a pretty sharp sell-off at the open. Taking a look at the Dow, it is down 386 points. The Nasdaq down 2%, 126 points to the downside. Of course, this after the record setter that we saw yesterday on Wall Street when the Dow Jones Industrials logged their single largest one-day point gain in history. We are talking 1,086 points to the upside. That is almost 5% for the Dow. The S&P 500 adding almost 5%. The Nasdaq adding almost 6%. But we are down this morning. No follow-through, at least not yet. Let's take a look at markets in Europe. Mixed performance here. The CAC in Paris is up just a point. The FTSE in London down 52. The DAX in Germany down 166, reopening after the Christmas holiday today. Asian markets mixed overnight. The Nikkei in Japan, the big winner, up just about 4%. And let's take a look at oil. Prices lower this morning after a 9% surge in yesterday's big rally. $45.56 a barrel is the quote. That is down 66 cents. Plus, setting a date, the United States and China set to resume trade negotiations in the new year. We do have details on the reported meeting. When will it happen? Then back here at home, the President and First Lady returning last hour from their surprise trip to Iraq to visit U.S. troops there. It is the President's first trip to a combat zone since he took office. The President taking time to address the government shutdown and how long it could last.
We need a wall. So when you say how long is it going to take, when are they going to say that we need border security? When are the Democrats going to say? Don't forget, the Democrats all agreed that you need a wall until I wanted it.
We're going to break it all down as lawmakers do return to Washington today. Will they get anything done? And a brave journey. This man from Oregon faces the impossible odds to set a world record in the harshest environment ever. Wait until you hear about his amazing story coming up. All of that coming up. And with me this morning, Fox News contributor and columnist for The Hill, Liz Peek. Assistant editorial page editor at The Wall Street Journal, James Freeman, and MaxFunds.com co-founder, Jonas Max Ferris. Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Good morning.
All right. We also have this morning the Wedbush Securities Research Managing Director, Dan Ives, the former presidential candidate, Herman Cain, FS Investments Chief U.S. Economist, Lara Rame, and Georgia Congressman and House Armed Services Oversight and Government Reform Committee member, Jody Heiss. So you don't want to miss a beat. What an amazing performance yesterday by the market. That is our top story this hour. We were hoping to see follow through. We have the opposite. Futures pointing to a sharply lower open. All this again as the major averages posted strong across the board gains yesterday. Biggest percentage gain since March of 2009. Again, the Dow up over 1,000 points. We have never seen that in history. The Nasdaq and the S&P 500 erasing all of their losses from that meltdown that we saw on Christmas Eve. Let's bring in Vining Sparks Bank and Equity Strategies Director Marty Mosby. Marty, you know, when we saw this huge melt up yesterday, we were saying, is this a turning point for the market or a technical bounce? But it appears to be the latter. What do you think?
Well, we have two forces really causing this volatility. One is the fear of recession. We're a decade past 2008, but it's in everybody's memory. So when they saw the downturn and we've seen some of the, information about maybe the economy slowing down, investors got very defensive as we went into fall. So that's been the first thing. The second thing is we passed a Volcker rule as we went through the financial reform. And that really took away the ability for market specialists to step into this trading. And so when you get imbalances, you really get much more volatility. So you got the fear of recession and this volatility according to the trading rules. And that's really where we're caught right now.
Should the SEC reinstate the uptick rule? And that would basically help to not compound the losses on the downside. If you could only, buy a stock on the uptick, right?
Right. I mean, so there are still things that they could do to clean it up. But really what you need is participants in the market, that they are in the market, making the markets, being able to participate and be able to kind of manage the flow of buy and sell. right now, if somebody wants to sell, the flip side is you got to find a buyer. So even those little things that you're talking about won't make a difference when you have to just say there's nobody in the middle that can step in and put any capital to work. If you got a buyer, you got to go find a seller. And if you got a seller, you go find a buyer. And in periods when the opposite side doesn't want to step in, you just create this, drift that we find ourselves in right now.
Yeah. Oil prices are falling again this morning. We saw basically 9% downturn upturn, in yesterday's trade. When stocks were up, oil was up too. And now we're seeing a little bit of the reverse. I want to bring in Liz Peek here. What do you make of the wild moves, not just in equities, but in commodities too, Liz?
Well, I think we're looking at all these things as sentiment indicators, almost sentiment about the economy going forward. And when people are optimistic, for example, I think the news that the Chinese and Americans are going to be meeting about trade, that obviously creates little hope that this trade tension is going to dissolve. And that's very positive for everything. It's positive for stocks. It's also positive for oil, because the real oil story is that demand growth is not that strong and supply growth is simply stronger. And so it's created this glut. I think that we all know that could disappear overnight if the Saudis and the Russians decide to cut production. But so far, so many years, we've all watched OPEC try and manage production. It sometimes works and it sometimes doesn't. There isn't a whole lot of confidence in their ability to do so. So, look, it's going to stay volatile. But at this moment, right there today, there's no particular news on oil. I think it really, again, is just more of a sentiment indicator.
It speaks to this volatility that we're seeing all around. And
that's right.
That's not healthy. That's not normal trading. Marty, how does the start of 2019 look to you? Because I thought yesterday we were getting the Santa Claus rally a little bit late. That doesn't seem to be the case. How does 2019 open to you?
Well, we think it'll still see some of this, back and forth at these lower levels. But eventually what we'll see is traction where these two things have to eventually, kind of play out. You're either going into recession or you're not going into recession. If we're not going into recession, then these valuations are too low. Profitability, especially for banks, if you can see profitability continue to move higher while the prices have moved lower, that gap has widened out. And eventually there's a winner and a loser. It just takes time for us to figure out which path we're really on, not just play off perception.
Do you think Wall Street is just trying to talk us into a recession at this point? Because if you look at the data, particularly from the consumer that we got yesterday, where's the recession? Where's the strong economy?
Well, yes, what we call this is the Chicken Little investment thesis, because the sky fell in 2008. Ever since then, whenever you felt like it was about to come collapsing back in, you ran inside. But that discipline in itself creates not the recession, it perpetuates this slow growth period that we've been in. And that's where we really think that we're going to see is that as we come out from under this perception and reality, the reality will be like we're seeing now with the Christmas season. The economy still is relatively strong, although slowing modestly.
Liz brought up the meeting that we're hoping for between U.S. officials and Beijing officials. That's a sign that trade tensions are thawing. Bloomberg reporting that a U.S. delegation will travel to China the week of January 7th to hold trade talks with Chinese officials. It will be Washington and Beijing's first face-to-face since President Trump and Xi agreed to that 90-day truce. That was at the G20 summit. Council of Economic Advisors Chairman Kevin Hassett weighing in on the president's trade policies just yesterday.
Well, I think that President Trump has focused on trade reform, and we're making an enormous amount of progress. There's even news today about some movement China's making with tariffs, and I think in the end he wants to reduce tariffs and non-tariff barriers, and he's really making a lot of progress in a short amount of time on that. And I think that's a very big positive for the outlook.
Marty, are you optimistic that he's laying the groundwork for a real deal?
Hopefully. What we'll see here is that both sides have a motivation to make progress. And that at the end of this, like we've seen with the U.S., Mexico, and Canada coming together, like U.S. and Europe, U.S. and China will also be motivated to get things back on track. So we hope this will be positive, and we think that'll be one of the catalysts as this begins to, again, to be able to allow the market to get its footing again.
Marty, hi, James Freeman with the Wall Street Journal. Speaking of Kevin Hassett, most of that rally yesterday happened after he said that Fed Chairman Jay Powell was 100% secure in his job. Do you think that was the reason, or are we blaming the algorithms, or investors just realizing the economy's not that bad?
Well, I think we had a couple of things. You had good holiday sale number coming in. You had, Treasury Secretary Mnuchin talking about the banks and their liquidity and ability to still fund the growth in the economy, which is exactly the case. The banks have 3 times more liquidity than they had in 2008. So a financial type of crisis like we saw back then is really not possible given everything that we've seen in the improvements in the bigger banks that we've been through. So there's several elements that led up to yesterday, and we think all that combination is what drove it up.
But nothing changed, Marty. The narrative has not changed. We don't have a deal with China. We don't have a solution to the government shutdown. We knew the consumer was strong. We knew consumer spending would be strong over the holiday season. We didn't know, but we thought that Jay Powell would stay on as head of the Fed. Was that enough to really move the market over 1,000 points to the upside? I think we're searching for a catalyst and then also a reason for the pullback again today.
Well, again, we got to take Monday's trading with Wednesday and then put what you're showing this morning. We're net basically all the same we were at Friday of last week. So this is all volatility. We're not talking about a catalyst that's actually solved the issue. This debate is not over. We're going to have this debate going into 2019.
Marty,
it's recession or not recession, and then banks, what the end result is going to be the matter.
Marty, why are banks down so much if they're so safe now with the stress test? What are investors worried about here with these banks? They're not in the position they were in 2008. Was there something we don't know about that's going on that investors are worried about?
No, there's nothing you don't worry about in the fundamentals. Fundamentals have continued to improve, but that's not what they're trading on. They're trading on perception in 2008. If you were an investor in banks in 2008, you lost a lot of money, and that was detrimental to your career and your position in the sense of what you were doing in your portfolios. Nobody wants to be there when that happens again. When you look at banks, if you go into recession, they're going to be down another 25 to 30% from here. If we don't go into recession and we have a base case, they're going to be up 30%. So we have a very dichotomous answer depending on what path we go down, and that's really what investors are trading on, depending on where they tend to go sway back and forth in this recession debate.
All right, Marty Mosby, thank you for coming on and answering all those questions this morning.
Thanks.
I thought we'd have better news, but anyway, thank you, sir. Coming up, honoring America's heroes, President Trump making a surprise visit to U.S. troops overseas. In his first visit to a combat zone, we're going to discuss the optics of that in just a bit. Plus, a solo trek, how this man accomplished the impossible by journeying across Antarctica. Police officer killed in the line of duty in Northern California. Christina Partsinevelos has the details.
Yeah, that's right, Lauren. The manhunt is on for the person accused of shooting and killing that officer during a traffic stop in Newman, California at 1 a.m. yesterday. The gunman was spotted buying beer at a food store. He's on your screen right now, and this is just before the shooting. The police are asking for the public's help. Officer Ronald Singh was 33 years old. He was working overtime on Christmas to try and provide for his family before being gunned down. His death brings the number of police officers shot and killed in the line of duty this year to 46. Reuters is reporting the latest allegations brought by Japanese prosecutors against ousted Nissan chairman Carlos Ghosn are based on the use of company funds to pay a Saudi businessman. That businessman is believed to have helped Ghosn out of his financial difficulties. Prosecutors arrested Ghosn for a third time last Friday, accusing him of aggravated breach of trust in transferring personal investment losses to the automaker. And now for some good news. An American has crossed Antarctica, becoming the first person ever to accomplish that feat alone. Colin O'Brady from Oregon made the epic 54-day journey without any assistance, hiking 930 miles in frigid temperatures. His friends and family tracked his trek online. O'Brady will wait for his friend, who's just a few days behind him, to finish the hike as well so they can celebrate together. And what a celebration. Have any of you guys done any massive hikes?
Me, not a chance. Any of you?
Well, maybe not massive No, not at all, actually.
I once walked to
Around
my
the
first
block.
job down on Hanover Square, downtown New York, from the Upper East Side. That was my big hike.
That's impressive.
Good, Jonas.
In wingtips.
Could you not afford like cat fare or something? What was going on? It was your first
We didn't
job.
have Uber back then, you know. It
Yeah.
was before your time.
So he
Lauren.
had the black tape.
Was
on
that or
his
the Lexington
nose.
train, it was called back in the day?
You're not that old, Jonas. The black tape on his nose. You were saying that
I
could
thought
have
it
been
might
for
be
the glare.
although the placement, it's not right under the eyes, so might have been some situation with the nose there. But his friend finishing second in a two-man race, but it's quite a race on the other hand.
I can't imagine. How long was it? How many days?
I'm not sure offhand, but that 54 days, yeah.
54
that
days.
is an incredible trek and very cold out. All right, coming up, it is cold in D.C. There is a shutdown. We're in day 6. Congress is back in Washington today as President Trump reiterates his stance on funding for the border wall. Plus, blackout battle. Disney and Verizon spat over programming fees now could affect fans trying to watch the NFL playoffs. President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump returning last hour from their surprise trip to visit U.S. troops overseas. They traveled to Iraq and Germany, and the president affirmed his promise to defeat ISIS.
Melania and I are thrilled to be here with the extraordinary men and women of the American Armed Forces, the greatest military, and especially as we get all of this, our objective in Syria was always to retake the territory controlled by ISIS. Some people said we've already retaken 99%. That's a number that comes up a lot. And if you look at the map before and after, it looks like 99%. Now that we have done so, the nations of the region must step up and take more responsibility for their future. And also, they have to confront those remnants of ISIS and take them out very easily.
James, let me get your reaction to what the president said and also the reaction to him just going there.
Yeah, well, certainly a very positive reaction, as there has been for every president. This is kind of a tradition that started in 2003 with George W. Bush, Barack Obama, and now President Trump and Melania Trump as well. Very positive reception from the troops, very excited, very grateful to have the President, First Lady there going over to thank them on behalf of all of us. But I think that issue in terms of Syria, where it did seem an abrupt decision, and perhaps it was, but he explained in a little more detail on this trip when talking to reporters, saying that basically he had been seeking to leave almost since the start of his presidency. He said the generals kept asking for 6 more months, and he said okay a couple of times and finally said no. And I think the big difference here between the president and some of his advisors is he wanted to focus on defeating ISIS. He is convinced that they are a shell of their former selves. Some of his advisors wanted to focus on changing the regime in Syria. President did not want to go there, but he also pointed out that from Iraq, U.S. troops can still hit targets in Syria, can still address the ISIS problem if it recurs.
Those 5,500 troops in Iraq stay, and they can satellite on a mission in as needed. Liz, can we trust our allies in the region to help us fight in Syria?
It's an interesting question. I don't think we can trust anyone in the Middle East ever. But we have to have strategic alliances. I think the Wall Street Journal actually yesterday ran an interesting story about how we are pivoting from allying with Saudi Arabia to allying with Turkey. I think a lot of people think that's a very questionable move because in the region, the Saudis are really respected as the head of Sunni Arab world, certainly the Gulf states, et cetera. And it's really not at all clear that anyone trusts the Turks. So, I mean, I think it's going to be interesting to see whether that actually does become our strategy going forward. But to James's point, the president has been talking about getting out of Syria. They've had, apparently, in the State Department, in the military, 100 different discussions about how that might be achieved. And to your point, I think finally he just said, I want out. I mean, this is really 2,000 troops, by the way. It's not like Afghanistan where there are many, many more than that. I think this is something that we can handle, and that since the objective has been achieved, it seems to me to be a reasonable thing to do.
Yeah. Today, day 6 of the partial government shutdown here at home. and there are no signs that it will end. Lawmakers returning to Washington today. You know, do we think a deal is going to be made, Jonas? I mean, are you hopeful? What will the Democrats agree to? What will the president sign?
I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of deals coming down the pike. I think the government's going to be half shut down for a long time, and I don't think that's what's wrong with the market. I don't think it's bad for the stock market. It hasn't been bad for the stock market really for the last 20 times the government's been shut down.
Yeah.
The only part of the government that can be bad is if the IRS shuts down, they can't collect tax revenues, or there's any issues where they can't pay debt. Those are the only times I think it really matters to markets. You know, they had a lot of trouble getting deals done before they lost control, essentially, of some of the government. And I don't think those problems are going to go away. They're not going to get better. But I think they can reach some agreement on the border wall. I think that'll actually come together because the public wants, and the Democrats aren't going to want to look like they just want marching bands of people coming across the border. So.
We don't get some government data from the Commerce Department, at least when the government is shut down. And I know new home sales, we were supposed to get them today. That's backwards looking. But still, it's not business as usual, and that's not what we elect our lawmakers to do, to shut down the government. Do you guys think when the new House comes in, it's a bad look for Democrats also? Yes, they're standing firm. We don't want a wall semantically or politically.
There's going to be a compromise.
But they don't want to be obstructionists either.
That's right. There will be a compromise, and it will look like this. There's going to be some money allocated, probably between $1.5 and $2.5 billion. They will call it border security with some sort of barrier. They may call it a barrier as opposed to a wall. The Democrats are absolutely going to, lie down in front of a train before they say they're going to build a wall. We'll build a barrier, and everyone will hopefully go home happy because I agree with you that nobody really wants this to go forward.
So $1.5 and $2.5 billion for a barrier.
The president signaled yesterday that he's ready to call it something else if they give the money, and it's really
this is what we elect them to do: is to parse words about what is a wall.
But it's a phony argument. They've already agreed they'll give money, and they've already agreed to secure the border. So there's no argument about principle. It's just whether he gets them to say the word wall, and it sounds like he may not demand that.
They don't want to give him a win. That's what I'm saying. When the House turns Democratic, it's all about fighting anything he wants. Coming up, speaking of him, President Trump's second year in office is actually coming to a close pretty soon. We've got to look at some of the best moments from his 2018 presidency and Apple's volatile year. What the tech giant can do now to turn things around in the new year. Welcome back. I'm Lauren Simonetti in for Maria Bartiromo. She has the day off. It is Thursday, December 27th. Your top stories at 6:30 a.m. Eastern. We are giving back gains on Wall Street. Take a look at futures pointing to a sell-off, 339 points to the downside after a record-setting day on Wall Street yesterday when the blue chip average had its biggest one-day point gain in history, tacking on almost 1,100 points. That's almost 5%. The broader market adding almost 5% yesterday. The Nasdaq closing higher by almost 6%. Markets back open in Europe after the Christmas holiday. We have a mixed performance. The CAC in Paris hanging on to a 1-point gain. The FTSE in London down 56, and the DAX in Frankfurt down almost 2%. Asian markets mixed overnight. The big winner, the Nikkei in Japan, up about 4%. A rough year for tech. The big name technology stocks drifting into bear market territory this year. We're going to tell you which ones are set to break out in the new year. Then danger in Indonesia. An erupting volcano diverting flights as fears grow of a possible second tsunami to hit that area. We have the latest on the situation. Plus, heading for a standoff, Verizon and Disney locking horns with customers in the crossfire. Disney Channel set to go dark on Fios as early as next week. Let me translate that. Possibly taking NFL playoff games with them. We've got the details, and it's the end of an era. After 20 years, the Ford Focus is riding off into the sunset. It is actually being discontinued. It is not alone. We are going to tell you which cars are driving off the lot in 2019. But our top story this half hour, the best political moments of 2018 as the year comes to a close. We're taking a look at how voters reacted to the biggest events in politics. And to do that, we bring in pollster and Meslansky and Partners President Lee Carter. Lee, thanks for coming on.
Great to be here.
Let's start by taking a look at President Trump's focus on the economy. You call this one the best rallying cry of 2018.
America is winning again. Last week we announced
that the U.S. economy grew at 4.1% last quarter. Nobody thought that was possible. And if the Democrats got in, that number would be 1.2. It could even turn negative. It was going to go down.
All right, what exactly did we see there?
So what you saw there was when he was talking about America is winning again, when he talks about the economy, he gets a lot of credit for it. Now, I know the markets have been a little bit volatile lately, so maybe not as much right now.
Just a little.
Just a little. But throughout the year, whenever he talked about it, it was one moment that he could even get Democrats to move up a little bit. You could see there that the dials went down when he started slamming Democrats. It's like if the Democrats were plus, it would never have happened. That doesn't work as well. But when he said America's winning again, when he talked about the specifics of the economy, jobs numbers, those kinds of things, people really resonated with it. It's something he got credit for.
Why did that not make a bigger impact on the midterm elections? It seems like the Republicans really were not very able to sell the good economy. And that at that point, we didn't have the market volatility. It was still great.
You know, I think there were a couple of things that were happening at that time. First of all, the president was the only one who was really carrying the Republican mantle. He was the mouthpiece of the Republican Party, and he was it. So if you like the president, you were with him. If not, you weren't. The economy by itself wasn't enough to carry. I think a lot of people said healthcare is really important to them. It was weighing on them. I think a lot of people gave the president the benefit of the doubt going into 2016 and said, you know what, he's going to fix Obamacare. I'm going to vote for him. He had 2 years. He didn't do it. And I think a lot of people were disappointed in that. So it wasn't the economy alone that was going to be enough to carry that election.
Which is unfortunate.
Is he being held back by his party?
You know what? There's a lot of debate whether he's being held back by the party or his party is being held back by him. And I think it depends on how you look at the world. I think what has to happen is everybody needs to get on the same page on that party. And a lot of people see that it's a lot of reluctant people supporting Trump, or a lot of hypocrisy, aren't sure how people really feel. And I think that in general, the Republican Party needs to get a couple things done. One, they need to get the wall done on immigration. And two, they need to put something forward on health care and get some kind of compromise done. I can't underscore enough how important that is to the American people right now. It's the number one issue for people who are not Republican, on independent and Democrats. And if we don't get something in health care done, I think that we're going to lose a big part.
Well, they started the crumbling process of it, so they have to have a plan to fix it since it's going to fall apart.
There's no question about it. And I think people are really frustrated. They said, you had 8 years of Obamacare to figure out an alternative. What is wrong with you that you couldn't get something done in 2 years?
They had a lot of non-binding votes.
You did bring up the border wall. You said he has to get it done, and this is another issue sparking debate this year. You call this the best symbolic moment for the president. Watch.
Well, it's happening. It's not build that wall anymore. It's continue building that wall, because we're building it. We're building it. We're fixing it. Miles and miles. We've got $1.6 billion. We're fixing the wall. We're building wall in San Diego. It's incredible how nobody wants the wall until it's in their backyard. Do you mind building us? Or they didn't like people walking across their front lawns in San Diego.
You're laughing.
I'm laughing because you almost have to do a wall count for that message. I don't know how many times he said. He must have said it 12 times in about a minute or less. But the wall is a message. There's a lot of work for the president. He doesn't just say, I'm getting tough on immigration. He says, I'm building a wall. That is something that got him elected, and it's something that he has promised and he needs to deliver on. Now, you made an interesting point. You said, I think it's not going to get done as a wall. It's going to get done as a barrier.
That's my new word.
I think it's a really interesting word. But the other thing that I heard last week was Vice President Pence said, we're going to focus on a fence and rebuilding a fence. And so I think what we're going to see now is, you could see how that Democrat line dipped as soon as he said, well, it was like on the floor. Well, he has to negotiate with Democrats right now and get some done. So I think you're right. I think we might see some tempering on the word wall, going back to, is it going to be a barrier? Is it going to be a fence? Is it going to be tougher border security? But that symbolic message of a wall is something that did a lot of work for him.
Let's talk about the most heated moments this year. Roll tape.
A shutdown is not worth anything, and that you should not have a Trump shutdown. You have the White House, a Trump shutdown. You have the White House. You have the Senate. You have the House of Representatives. You have the votes. You should pass it.
No, we don't have the votes, Nancy, because in the Senate we need 60 votes.
No, but in the House,
and we don't have.
You could bring it up right now.
Yeah, but I can't. Excuse me, but I can't get it passed in the House if it's not going to pass in the Senate. I don't want to waste time.
was heated, but that was actually the best deal-making moment, you say.
Yeah,
Where's the deal?
Where is the deal? But you know what? The fact, there are a lot of controversy around this, whether he should have done this on tape or not. You can see those dials were a little bit like Spaghetti Junction, but independents and Republicans were really down when Pelosi was talking. They went back up when the president was talking. But a lot of folks gave him credit for this and said, I like the fact that there's transparency around this negotiation. And a lot of people also said, you know what? I'm glad he's owning this. I'm glad he's fighting for us and saying, you know what? No more. I'm not going to make any compromises. I'll shut it down. I'll do it. And he did it in front of everybody. And people said, I know where he stands. There's none of these backroom shenanigans where I don't know what happened. And I think it actually, there's some controversy about this. I know some people said this was a terrible thing that he did. I think it actually is going to play to his favor.
Well, that's what history says. As Jonas was talking about this, it seemed that Pelosi-Schumer objective in that meeting was to get Trump to own the shutdown, on the belief that this is political disaster for him and that it always hurts Republicans when they have these fights. Over the course of time, that's really not the case.
Right.
Ronald Reagan shut down the government more than once a year and then got reelected in a landslide. So it's not the case that this is some political disaster, although it's often portrayed that way.
It's standing up for what you believe in.
Right.
And I think most people think that's a good thing. I thought the worst thing about that trio talking was that all Schumer and Pelosi did was sort of get the cameras out of here, get the cameras. They were so worried about looking foolish, and they ended up looking foolish, in my view, and not...
We have time for one more dial, and I thought you guys would appreciate this. Not everything was so serious this year. Politicians take time sometimes to make fun of themselves. This is the best self-deprecating moment.
Look at that. I'd love to watch that guy speak. I try like hell to hide that bald spot. Doesn't look bad. Hey, we're hanging in.
You know what? There are not very many moments where you see a crack into who this president is. That was a moment that people really enjoyed.
I was there.
You were there?
It was fantastic. Everybody laughed.
You know what? In the CPAC speech, and I took a look at the whole thing when I was going through getting ready for this, that was a real moment. If you want to get to know the president a little bit more, watch that. And you had just mentioned that without us having this conversation.
It was so charming, and the audience was totally in his corner. And he spoke for like an hour and a quarter, and no one left the room, let me tell you. It was exciting.
And I think it's really interesting to hear that kind of, or see that kind of side of this president, because we see a lot of the bombast, we see a lot of the name calling, we see a lot of the times that we're picking on him. We don't often see the fact that he's, first of all, picking on himself, and second of all, able to just sort of have some things off script, lighthearted. And that was one of those moments, and I thought it was a great insight to maybe who you might get to see the president if you saw him a little bit off the main stage. But even on the main stage.
On some of the best political moments, don't go too far, because you're going to come back with some more of the top political moments from the year, 8:30 a.m. Eastern. Well, coming up right now, blackout battle, Verizon and Disney going head-to-head over programming fees, why the fight could affect the NFL playoffs. That's next. Plus, squashing the Beetle, the iconic Volkswagen among one of the cars that you won't see anymore after 2019. What else is being taken off the assembly line when we return?